daughter left a voicemail that lasted 47 seconds. I know because I listened to it 11 times. Dad, we need you out by the end of the month. Bart and I talked it over, and honestly, you're in the way. This is our house now. You can find somewhere else to be. Then a pause, like she was deciding whether to add something softer. She didn't. Just hung up. I stood in my kitchen. The kitchen I'd remodeled in 2009 with reclaimed oak cabinets and soapstone countertops, holding my phone and listening to my own daughter tell me I was in the way. I was 64 years old. I'd spent 31 years as a civil engineer with the county of Buncombe, North Carolina. I'd built bridges, literally, and somehow I hadn't seen this one collapsing. I didn't cry. I didn't call her back. I made a pot of coffee, sat down at the table, and smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't come from happiness. The kind that comes from finally understanding exactly what you're dealing with. My name is Stuart. I'm 64 years old, retired 18 months ago, lived in a 4-bedroom Craftsman on Kalmia Drive in Asheville. I bought it in 1998 for $187,000. Watched it appreciate through 2 recessions and 1 pandemic to somewhere north of $640,000. I know the exact number because I'd had it appraised 4 months before that voicemail. Not because I was planning anything. Just because I'm an engineer and engineers don't like uncertainty. My daughter is 36. Her name is Dina. She was a good kid. Curious, stubborn, laughed too loud at her own jokes, which I always loved. She got her mother's eyes and my tendency to overplan. For most of her life, those were qualities I admired. Then she married Bart. Bart arrived at a neighborhood cookout 6 years ago, wearing a Patagonia vest in July and telling everyone within earshot about his consulting business. He had the handshake of a man who'd practiced it in a mirror and the vocabulary of someone who'd taken 1 semester of business school and never quite recovered. Words like leverage and synergy and, my personal favorite, pivot. He was always pivoting. In 5 years, it pivoted from marketing consulting to e-commerce to something involving cryptocurrency that I never fully understood, and apparently neither did he, because it disappeared along with $22,000 of my daughter's savings. Dana didn't tell me about the $22,000 until later. She told me they were in a transitional period and asked if they could stay with me for a few months while they restructured. That was 2 years and 3 months ago. The first 6 months were fine. They paid a little toward groceries. Bart talked about his next venture. Dina worked remotely for a healthcare company, pulling in around $68,000 a year. It wasn't comfortable. 4 adults in one house. My girlfriend Nola came over most weekends and the tension was palpable. But I told myself it was temporary. Family helps family. That's what my father taught me, and his father before him. Then temporarily stopped having a deadline. Bart quit his latest project, something involving dropshipping, and declared he was taking time to think. That thinking lasted 8 months. He woke up around 10 most mornings, made elaborate pour-over coffee with beans that cost $22 a bag, and spent his afternoons watching YouTube videos about fan life and financial independence. Meanwhile, I was still paying the mortgage, both utility bills, the internet he used 12 hours a day, and quietly covering the grocery runs that somehow always included $60 worth of specialty items Dana said they needed. The disrespect came in layers, the way water damage does. You don't notice it until it's already in the walls. Bart stopped saying thank you somewhere around month 4. By month 8, he'd started referring to the house as our place in conversations with friends I'd hear through the thin wall of my own living room. Dina followed his lead, small corrections when I rearranged the pantry. We keep that on the second shelf, Dad. Little sighs when I watch the news too loud. A comment in front of Nola about how older people have trouble adapting. I was standing right there. Nola squeezed my hand under the table. We'd been together 3 years, met at a bluegrass festival in Brevard. She was a retired school principal with strong opinions about honesty and zero tolerance for nonsense. She saw what was happening before I admitted it to myself. Stuart, she said one evening, when we were alone on the back porch, when's the last time either of them thanked you for anything? I thought about it longer than I should have. The voicemail came on a Tuesday morning in February. I'd been up since 5, the way I always am. I'd made coffee, read the paper, and was considering whether to finally clean out my workshop when the notification appeared. I almost didn't listen to it immediately. I'm glad I did. After the 11th time, I set the phone face down on the counter. I called Nola, told her what happened. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "What I should have done a year ago," I said. "I'm going to let them have exactly what they asked for." Here's what Dana and Bart didn't know. 3 months after they moved in, when Bart's first pivot failed, and I started doing the math on how long this might actually last, I'd driven to downtown Asheville to see an attorney named Philip Oakes. I'd worked with him on an estate matter after my mother passed. Smart, methodical, the kind of man who doesn't get surprised by things. I told him the situation. He'd listened without interrupting, which I appreciated. "You want to protect yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to understand my options," I said, "before I need them." We spent 2 hours going through everything. The deed to the house, sole ownership, my name only. The financial records, utilities, mortgage, property tax, all in my name, all paid by me. We updated my living trust, made sure every asset was clearly documented with clear transfer conditions. Nothing dramatic, just precision. Philip had looked at me over his reading glasses. "You're preparing for something you hope won't happen." "I'm an engineer," I said. "We don't hope, we plan." The day after the voicemail, I drove back to his office. "It happened," I said. He nodded slowly, opened the file he'd apparently kept updated. "What outcome are you looking for?" I told him I wanted to honor her request. She wanted me out. Fine, I'd go. But I'd take everything with me that was actually mine, which, as it turned out, was everything that mattered. We drafted the formal notice that afternoon. Under North Carolina law, since there was no written lease and no established payment history, they were occupants, not tenants. That distinction mattered enormously. I could issue a 30-day notice to vacate without going through a full eviction proceeding, though if they refused, that option was available too. The notice was hand-delivered by courier at 11 the next morning. I was at Nola's apartment when it arrived, sitting in her sunroom with a cup of tea I couldn't taste, watching a cardinal work through her bird feeder. My phone started buzzing at 11:14, then 11:16, then 11:19. By noon, I had 9 missed calls from Dina and 4 from Bart. I'd never received 4 calls from Bart in the entire time I'd known him. I picked up on the 10th call from Dina. "What is this?" Her voice was high and sharp, the way it caught when she was cornered. "It's a notice to vacate," I said. "You told me you needed me out. I'm accommodating that request." "That is not. I didn't mean we weren't saying you had to leave tomorrow. The notice gives you 30 days. That's generous, actually." "Generous? Dad, you're evicting your own daughter." "I'm responding to a voicemail in which you told me this was your house now and that I should find somewhere else to be." I found somewhere else to be. The math worked out. Silence. Then Bart's voice in the background asking what was happening. Then Dana again trying a different tone, softer, more familiar. "Dad, come on, we can talk about this. This is insane." "We can absolutely talk," I said. "Have your attorney reach out to Philip Oakes. He'll handle the details." I hung up. Nola had been listening from the kitchen doorway. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, sat beside me, and handed me a piece of toast with peanut butter that I definitely hadn't asked for and absolutely needed. Over the next week, I started moving. Not everything at once. Just the things that were irreplaceable. My father's tools from the workshop. The collection of USGS topographic maps I'd been framing and hanging since 1994. The good cast iron, which Dinah had been using and had never once properly seasoned. My drafting table, which had been in 3 different offices before it found a home in my spare bedroom. I'd already arranged a rental in West Asheville, a 2-bedroom bungalow on Haywood Road, $1,650 a month-to-month lease. Small, quiet, mine. Loading the truck on a Saturday morning, I heard Dana come outside. She stood on the porch in her robe, arms crossed against the February cold, watching me work. "You don't have to do this," she said. I set down the box I was carrying, turned to look at her. "Dana, do you remember what you said in that voicemail?" Her jaw tightened. I was frustrated. Bart and I had been arguing You said I was in the way. You said this was your house now. Those were exact words. People say things. They do, I agreed. And then other people make decisions based on what was said. That's how communication works. I picked up the box again. "You have until March 14th. I'd suggest using the time productively." She didn't respond. When I looked back at the porch, she'd gone inside. What Dana and Bart hadn't accounted for, what people who live off someone else's resources rarely do account for, is how those resources actually interconnect. They knew about the house. They didn't know about everything else. 6 weeks before the voicemail, I'd had a quiet conversation with the financing company that held Bart's business equipment loan. 3 years ago, when he'd started his e-commerce venture, he'd needed $18,500 in startup equipment. His credit score was $581. Dana had asked me to co-sign, and I had, because I was still believing the temporary narrative. That co-signature was voluntary, and it could be withdrawn under changed circumstances. I documented the changed circumstances carefully: the voicemail, the notice to vacate, Philip's letter. Estrangement was well established. The withdrawal paperwork went out certified mail, while Dana was presumably searching online for places that accepted tenants with no rental history and one income. I also called my insurance broker. Dina had been on my homeowner's policy as an additional occupant for 2 years. That coverage would end with her occupancy. Bart's equipment, which he stored in my garage, would no longer be covered under my policy either. These were not malicious acts, they were accurate ones. The notice period ticked by. No payment came, no formal response from any attorney on their behalf. Just a series of phone calls that went from pleading to accusatory and back again, cycling through emotions like a broken thermostat. Bart called me directly once. It was a Wednesday evening. He led with confidence, which told me he'd rehearsed. "Stuart, look. Man to man. We got off on the wrong foot here, but I've got some opportunities on the horizon, real ones, and if you can give us another 60 days. "Bart," I said, "in 3 years you've had 11 opportunities on the horizon. Not one of them produced income that covered your share of living here. I'm not interested in waiting for a 12. That's not fair. Things take time." "They do," I said. "You've had 27 months. The notice stands." A pause. Then, quieter, "What about Dana? She's your daughter." Which is why I gave her 30 days instead of 15. "Good night, Bart." A week before the deadline, I received a letter from a legal aid office. Dina and Bart had retained representation. The letter argued emotional hardship, claimed I had established an implied tenancy through years of informal cohabitation, and suggested that immediate vacating would constitute constructive eviction under North Carolina law. I forwarded it to Philip without comment. He called me back the same afternoon, and I could hear the careful neutrality in his voice that meant he was suppressing amusement. "This is not a strong letter," he said. I gathered. An implied tenancy requires consistent payment from the tenant side. They never paid rent. They made occasional grocery contributions. That doesn't establish tenancy." He paused. "They're hoping you'll settle to avoid the hassle." "Then they don't know me well enough," I said, which is ironic given the circumstances. We prepared our response, documented every month of non-payment, provided utility bills, mortgage statements, tax records, all in my name, all paid by me. The house had never been anything other than mine in any legal, financial, or documented sense. Their attorney didn't push further. On March 14th, I drove to Kalmia Drive for the last time as the owner in residence. Nola came with me. We walked through the rooms together, quiet. The place was mostly empty. They'd moved out 3 days early, to where I didn't know yet, taking the furniture Dina had purchased during the marriage and leaving behind 2 broken bar stools and a large television that turned out to be connected to a streaming account still billed to my card. I cancelled the card that afternoon. The house went on the market 8 days later. My realtor, a no-nonsense woman named Constance who'd sold 4 properties for me over the years, priced it at $649,000 based on recent comps in the neighborhood. We had 3 showings in the first week and 2 offers by day 10. I accepted a cash offer at $655,000 from a couple relocating from Charlotte. Both worked in healthcare. They wanted to close in 6 weeks. I said that worked. After the mortgage balance, realtor fees, and closing costs, I cleared just over $498,000. I wasn't gloating about that number. Money is a tool, not a trophy. But I thought about the 27 months of carrying costs, mortgage, utilities, groceries, co-signed debt that I'd absorbed in the name of family, and I thought about the 47-second voicemail that told me I was in the way. And then I thought about $498,000 sitting in an account with my name on it, and I felt something very close to peaceful. Dana called twice during the closing period. The first call was brief. She'd heard the house was listed, and her voice had that controlled quality people use when they're trying not to sound panicked. She asked if I'd reconsider. I told her there was nothing to reconsider. The second call came the night after closing. She was crying. Real tears, not performed ones. I know my daughter well enough to tell the difference. We're in a motel on Tunnel Road, she said. It's $79 a night and it smells like old cigarettes, and Bart's already talking about moving to Phoenix because he has a contact there. I let her talk. Didn't interrupt, didn't offer anything. Are you even listening? She asked. I'm listening. Then say something. Dana, 6 months ago, you could have come to me and said, this isn't working, we need a real plan. We could have talked, set a timeline, figured out a path forward. Instead, you left me a voicemail telling me I was in the way and that it was your house now. I paused. I've been saying something for 2 years. Nobody was listening then. She hung up. I sat for a while in the quiet of the Haywood Road bungalow, listening to a train pass somewhere in the distance and the tick of the mental clock I'd inherited from my father. It had been my grandfather's before that, a Seth Thomas 1930s 8-day movement. I'd serviced it myself 3 times. It was the most reliable thing in the room. I thought about Dana at 16, sitting in my workshop while I explained how load-bearing calculations worked, asking questions faster than I could answer them. I thought about driving her to her first day of college in a rented minivan with every possession she owned, how she'd cried at a gas station in Statesville and made me promise not to tell anyone. I thought about how people can be 2 things at once. The daughter I loved, the person who left that voicemail. Both true. Both real. The co-signed equipment loan went into default 2 weeks after the house closed. Without my income on the backing, the lender had re-evaluated and found Bart's solo credit profile insufficient. They sent a demand letter. Bart apparently didn't respond. A collection agency got involved. The equipment, laptops, cameras, fulfillment hardware, was repossessed out of a storage unit on Swannanoa River Road. I know because Dana told me during a third call, this one quieter than the others. Bart's gone, she said. He left for Phoenix. Said he needed to reset. He took his car and his good headphones, and that was basically it. I didn't respond immediately. I'm staying with a friend from work, she said. I have my job, I'm okay. She stopped. I wanted you to know I understand what happened. Not all of it yet, but I'm starting to. That's a beginning, I said. Are you happy? I looked out the window. The street was quiet. Nola was coming for dinner in an hour, bringing wine and the remnants of a crossword she'd been working on for 3 days. I had my clocks, my maps, my workshop set up in the second bedroom. I had a life that felt, for the first time in years, like mine. Yeah, I said. I'm happy. She was quiet for a moment. I'm glad, and I think she meant it. I didn't hear from her again for 6 weeks. When she called, it was on a Sunday morning, unhurried. She'd found an apartment in River Arts District, a one-bedroom, $1,100 a month. She'd started seeing a therapist. She asked careful questions about how I was doing, and she listened to the answers, which was something I hadn't experienced in 2 years. We had coffee the following Thursday at a place on Lexington. She arrived early. So did I. It wasn't easy. There was a long stretch where neither of us said anything, and we both pretended to study the menu, even though we'd both already ordered. But it was honest, and honest is something you can work with. I let him lead me somewhere I didn't want to go, she said eventually, meaning Bart. And then I blamed you for being in the way of a direction I shouldn't have been heading. I didn't say anything. Let her have the space. I'm sorry, Dad. I know that doesn't fix it, but I am. I looked at my daughter across the table, 36 years old. Her mother's eyes. My tendency to sit with things too long before saying them. I know you are, I said. We didn't hug when we left. We didn't need to. We shook hands slightly, laughed a little at ourselves for shaking hands, and agreed to do it again in 2 weeks. On the drive home, I stopped at a red light on Merriman and thought about the word foundation. I'd used it 10,000 times in my career. Load capacity, soil composition, what a structure can bear before it shifts. I'd spent 31 years making sure things didn't collapse, and I'd spent 27 months ignoring every warning sign that something at home was failing from the ground up. But here's what I knew from engineering and from everything else: a foundation can be rebuilt. It takes time, it takes the right materials, it takes honesty about what failed and why. I wasn't in a hurry. Nola had tickets to a concert in Black Mountain the following weekend. I had a 1940s Ingram mantel clock waiting on my workbench, movement frozen, case intact, nothing wrong with it that patience and the right tools couldn't fix. I pulled into the bungalow, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment listening to the neighborhood settle into afternoon quiet. A dog barked somewhere down the block. A kid rode past on a bicycle. I'd been told I was in the way. Turned out I was just in a house that had stopped being a home. When I left, I took the home with me. I keep thinking about that voicemail. 47 seconds. I listened to it 11 times, and I still can't tell you whether Dana knew what she was really saying when she said it, that this is our house now, that I was in the way. I don't think she did. I think she was exhausted and angry. And she'd been letting Bart define her reality for so long that she'd started to borrow his carelessness. That's how it works sometimes. You don't become someone different overnight. You just make 100 small choices that add up to a person you wouldn't have recognized 5 years earlier. What I had to reckon with, what took me longer than I care to admit, is that I made choices too. I kept the door open past the point where keeping it open was generous. It became something else. It became permission. Every month I absorbed the disrespect without consequence. I was teaching them that there were no consequences. That's not kindness. That's a failure of nerve dressed up to look like love. Doing the right thing isn't always the comfortable thing. I knew what was happening in that house for at least a year before I acted on it. I saw the entitlement calcify. I heard Bart call it our place to his friends while I was standing in my own kitchen. I watched my daughter stop saying thank you and start saying we keep that on the second shelf. And I told myself I was being patient. What I was really being was afraid that setting a boundary would cost me her. I had it backward. It was the absence of boundaries that was costing me everything. There's a kind of intelligence that isn't about credentials or strategy. It's about reading a situation clearly and being willing to act on what you see, even when acting is harder than waiting. I'd spent 31 years as an engineer reading load tolerances, understanding what structures could bear before they failed. I applied that precision to bridges and drainage systems, and I refused to apply it to my own home. That was a failure of clear thinking. When I finally did apply it, when I sat down with the actual numbers, the actual documents, the actual legal reality of what I owned and what I'd given, everything became very simple. The complicated part was never the situation. It was my reluctance to see it plainly. And then there's what happened after. The part where I didn't collapse when Dana cried on the phone from that motel on Tunnel Road. The part where I didn't call Philip and tell him to slow everything down because maybe they needed more time. Holding steady through that, through your own child's voice breaking and the pull to fix it the old way. That's not stubbornness. That's understanding that real help and immediate relief are not the same thing. Dina needed to feel the ground shift under her in order to build something solid. I couldn't want that for her and also protect her from it at the same time. She's in her own apartment now. She's seeing a therapist. She showed up early to coffee. I don't know what we're building yet. I know it's slower and more careful than what came before, and I know it has a better foundation, because this time it's built on what's actually true between us instead of what we were both pretending. I turned 64 in a house that felt like mine again. Nola brought wine. The St. Thomas clock ticked on the mantel the way it has for 80 years. Some things hold. Some things are worth holding on to. I was told I was in the way. Turns out I was just standing in the wrong house.